I'm Alexis Hood.
And I'm Amy Plurd.
And you're listening to Forks.
Today's guest is someone who I've long admired for how they live their life, which I see as embracing constant transformation. She seems to always be on a journey towards living her best and most authentic life, no matter how much work that takes. Kathleen Killen is a psychotherapist whose work is centered around helping couples and individuals navigate the complex terrain of their relationships. Kathleen comes to this work having overcome tremendous challenges and heartbreak of her own. And in this episode, we'll talk about navigating divorce, single parenting, addiction, and mental health. What inspires me most about Kathleen is how she's channeled her life's most challenging experiences into a skill set that now helps others with their toughest moments. Welcome, Kathleen. We are thrilled that you are joining us.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here. Exciting.
So I'm wondering if you could start by telling us how to fix all of our relationships. If we could start there. I've been married 24 years. Amy, about the same. So if you could just get it all out of the way and get us perfect, we'd like to start there.
No problem. I do have an answer, actually.
Oh, okay. Well,
no, okay. I'm sort of kidding. It's not the answer to all relationship challenges, but I really think taking ownership for your own emotional regulation and how you own your own emotions and how you communicate those emotions is huge. And I think our relationships would be so much stronger if we all learned how to do that. And unfortunately, we don't learn that in school. And we often don't learn it from our parents because they also had challenges often with emotional regulation. And so that is a biggie. It's not going to solve all the problems in relationships, but it's a big one.
That is a great answer. I've started thinking actually a lot about emotional regulation when it comes to, you mentioned school, but just even in a professional setting. I feel like the leaders that I have really appreciated the most are probably those who have the best emotional regulation skill sets.
Mm-hmm.
So that everybody isn't just operating in this like turmoil.
For sure. Oh yeah, for sure. And when I think back to my corporate life, before I became a psychotherapist, I remember knowing when my boss was about to go on vacation because he was so stressed and like the reign of terror so in multiple cases, how we handle our emotions, whether it be stress, sadness, happiness, anything is really, really key. So are we done the episode? Are we done?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wrap. Thanks for coming. So as I've mentioned, this podcast is called Forks, and we love to kind of dive into the fork in the road that changed your life. But before we get to that, can you tell us a little bit about what your life is like today? And maybe you can kind of walk us through, you were mentioning your corporate life and now this new space, but I know what I see on social media, which always makes me feel more peaceful and like I can do more to get to that space. So what is your life like these days?
So, wow, my life has changed so much, which I know we're going to get into, but my life is maybe not as peaceful as you see on social media, but it definitely has really large components of peace. So I have a pretty busy psychotherapy practice. Like you mentioned in the intro, I'm a relationship therapist. But my day usually begins with certain practices like spiritual practices, meditation, exercise, often includes me going outside, taking some breaths of fresh air, going for a walk. I see a number of clients throughout the day. I also have a podcast, which I record 1 or 2 times a week. And
Sisters in Sobriety, everybody.
Yes. Sisters in Sobriety. And, I spend as much time as I can with my daughter, and I do have a partner as well. And so we don't have as much time as we would like because we both have busy schedules, but I really try to be intentional about the time I spend with the people closest to me. My day ends, and Alexis, I know you know this because I think I posted once about my bedtime routine, which like starts at 8 p.m. But I'm asleep by 9 because I wake up at 5. And my life is much more calm and peaceful intentionally than it ever has been before. But I will say it's not that I'm not producing a lot. I just have a different outlook on it.
Yes, your sleep schedule. So Kathleen had been posting one day about, I'm in bed and it's, 8:30. And I was like, oh God, that just, I felt like you gave me permission to just go to bed early. So if I ever feel guilty, I think Kathleen would appreciate this. She would give me the.
Oh, I would. If you ever 8 p.m., can I get into bed? Just think of me. I will be there. Unless I'm seeing clients. So I do see clients a couple of nights later. But then I balance that, right? Like I balance that with going for an extra long walk the next morning. I don't get up at 5. The next morning I get up at 6 or whatever. So
Right.
it is balanced.
So now for listeners, so we go way back. We went to PR school together once upon a time back in the early 2000s. And when I first met you, your life was different than it is today. You were working towards kind of that corporate life, and I had a young baby, and you were living the life. So we were kind of in very different spaces. So your journey, you went into the corporate world, and then we have this kind of juxtaposition between then and now. Maybe you can take us to your fork and tell us, we have so many forks in our life, but what kind of led you to this big shift that you are living today?
I think that my whole life led me to the big shift. So it's hard to pinpoint one place, but I think there's a few things. Definitely sobriety for me has led me eventually to the shift, but the end of my marriage was really the catalyst for change in me. I was changing in sort of micro amounts, I felt like before, and I had things in my life that I really leaned upon, but I wasn't really living my truth, so to speak. But I remember it clearly, and it is a bit dramatic, but I remember clearly I was maybe 3.5 weeks into the decision to separate from my ex-husband, and I found out that he had a new girlfriend. And I'm going to say the term new with quotations around them, because it was 3 weeks in and it just crushed me like I had never been crushed before. And the fork in the road was really me on my kitchen floor, sobbing for about 3 hours. No exaggeration there. And questioning my whole relationship with him, questioning everything, not understanding how someone I had loved so deeply could move on so quickly. And then perhaps the key piece was realizing that no one was coming to help me. No one was going to change this for me. No one was coming to save me. If I was going to live my best life, I had to save myself. And it took me 3 hours to get to that point, and a lot of tears. But I got up from that very hard kitchen floor, and I knew I was going to use the experience of my divorce as a catalyst for change. And I did.
What sort of plan took shape at that point? Or what did you think you would do to take that control?
So I, at that point, just knew I had to help change my outlook on things. So I didn't know that I would eventually, 6 years later be a psychotherapist, not by any means, but I knew that I could manage my own emotions in the sense that I had had a lot of meditation training, a lot of mindfulness practices in my life. I had had all of these tools, but I had never really put them all together and been consistent with them. So I actually took a leave from work, which I know not everyone has the choice to do that or the benefit. I had some very, very understanding employers, and I took a month off work. And I really doubled down on the practices to help me be emotionally healthy. I started seeing a therapist again, and I really did that work. It wasn't until I actually started, I had a blog when I was kind of in my early 40s that I was posting on like natural health things. And I all of a sudden started writing about my divorce. And I started getting people from around the world contacting me, like literally on social media, asking to have phone calls with me about how are you, I'm going through a divorce too. How are you navigating this? How are you surviving this? And so I ended up just talking to people from all over the world. I wasn't coaching them. I was just having conversations. And then a very close friend of mine who was also going through a very, very difficult divorce, she was a coach, and she said, you should try coaching. And I was like, I don't know. I was in corporate world. I had been a leader for a long time, but I never thought about being a coach. I kind of thought life coaches like were a dime a dozen. And she said, just do one course. And so I did one course the beginning of March 2020. So you all know what comes after that. And it was the first week of March. And I did the course, fell in love with coaching, and then the world shut down.
So you're doing coaching. You are now going through this divorce.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really interesting what you said about having taken some time off.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit more about that. And I ask that because I've had times where, I've been going through something really difficult that has affected my mental health, for example. And I'm thinking about something that happened many years ago. And I really didn't feel like I could take time off. Like when I think about myself in that moment, I remember feeling like I was in this personal crisis, and yet I needed to white knuckle and show up at work every day and try to do this thing. And I know that that's not just me. So many people go through this stuff. And I mean, a lot of corporate spaces, you can take some time off, and a lot of people, I think, and I think this is me, felt like, oh God, I couldn't possibly take time off, as if I'm some world-renowned surgeon or something saving lives. Can you share your perspective on how important it is in those moments to take that time off and take that breather when it's in that crisis?
I realized how privileged I was to be able to do that, because lots of people who are self-employed can't do that. Lots of people who don't have benefits that can provide that can't do it. And I see that. I think I was one of those people who would just white knuckle through anything. And I saw my friend go through a divorce right before I was going through mine. And she would have to literally like pull over to the side of the road on her way to work to cry. Like she just was a mess. And then she would have to put on this smiley face, go into these meetings. Her energy would be drained. And quite frankly, when my separation occurred, the first few weeks, I was going into work and I was okay. I wasn't amazing, but I was getting through, and it actually was a healthy distraction for me. But when things turned and I had additional information that broke me in that moment, I couldn't pull up my socks and go to work. I was like, I can't do this right now. And I luckily was able to be open with my employer and just say, I am not being my best at work right now. I'm not able to give my best. I need some time. I'm exhausted. I'm not sleeping. I didn't get into too many details, but they were really supportive of me. And they really said, like, take as much time as you need. And that time, oh gosh, that was like, I was able to feel my emotions. And that was my real, like, that was my mission. That was my goal. I'm going to feel my emotions on a day-to-day basis, the changing emotions, the waves of my emotions. And I didn't have to put on my suit and a smiley face and go and lead a team. I think that my healing would have happened if I had done that, but it would have taken a lot longer, and it would have been a different process for sure.
That makes me think of the emotional sobriety you talk about. And I'm curious if you can define that and how that works. And is that sort of the process that you were going through there to manage your emotions?
So when we talk about sobriety, there's physical sobriety, which is the absence of using whatever substance that you were using, right? That was no longer helpful in your life. And then emotional sobriety is something different. And you can be physically sober, but not emotionally sober. Emotional sobriety is really taking responsibility for your own emotions and managing your own emotions and the ups and downs of life that happen, having tools to be able to manage those ups and downs of life. Because if you have those other healthy tools, then you don't rely on the substance. So it's not about white knuckling it and just not having the substance. It's like, what are the other practices you have in place? And my view is that those need to be daily practices. So I don't necessarily think about the term emotional sobriety on a day-to-day basis, but I definitely think of my own mental health and well-being on a daily basis and what I need to have in place in order to maintain that.
I'm sorry, Kathleen, are you saying that we have to feel our feelings every day?
Oh, we do. We do. And not only do we need to feel them, but we also need to be able to process them like every day, but it's not, and then not let our thoughts get attached to them. So there is, there's a lot to it, but it's not as hard as you would think. I remember years and years and years in my life that I was not great at emotional regulation. I wouldn't call myself emotionally sober. I really think that I only became emotionally sober probably around 6 years ago when my divorce happened, maybe a little bit before. But it's really just a practice. It's not, you're never going to be perfect at it, but it's just a practice that you keep doing little by little.
I know I deal with anxiety. And so a practice I engage in is to really reflect on what is true, like what's real, and what am I making up in my head? Because so often that's the source of it, is me letting my imagination kind of go wild and then make up what I think other people are thinking, what I think is going to happen. And I try to ground myself with, okay, what do I know is true? What do I know is real? And stop there.
I say that probably 10 times a day to myself and to my clients. So I think that's great that you brought that up, Amy, because thoughts are just thoughts, right? Like they're just actually words that are, or images in our head. We don't actually know if they're based in fact. Are they factual? Are they real? I often say, what story am I telling myself? Or what story is this? That's, if I notice, okay, I'm having anxiety, I feel it usually in my body first. Okay, what story am I telling myself that is contributing to this? And is it true?
Mm-hmm. I've heard you say that in your podcast, and that really sticks with me as well. And I do try to say that a lot. And I do try to help my kids with that. My younger one who really struggles with anxiety. Yeah, we often talk about, that's a movie that's playing in our head.
Mm-hmm.
And turn that movie off, or we can question it if we should be watching it.
We can redirect that movie.
Yeah, exactly. We can play a whole different movie. Just to kind of better understand your timeline. So 2020, your divorce process begins.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of your sobriety, when did that happen?
So I am sober from drugs, from cocaine and alcohol now, but it was about 15 years ago that I became sober from drugs. And so it's been a long time-ish, I guess, for sobriety from that. But my ex-husband was in recovery, and I don't know if he is now still, but he was in recovery. So I chose not to drink very much at all during our marriage. And there was about 4 years that I didn't drink in our marriage. And then when we got divorced, lo and behold, I started drinking more. Mm-hmm. And at the start of that separation, and I was like, what is happening? And that was sort of also a catalyst of like, what is going on? My emotional sobriety is not here. And so I really cut out alcohol then, but now I haven't had an alcoholic drink in probably 2.5 years. However, my issue was never really alcohol. It was always on the drug side. So I just choose not to drink. I feel better. It's not a hard choice for me. It is easy for me not to have alcohol, and I just don't want it. So I am sober from both, but I would consider my sobriety is really from drugs.
Mm. Yeah, I don't drink very much either. And for me, a lot of that was driven by the fact that I get chronic migraines. But, and so that's helped. But to your point, I've noticed not drinking. Like that's been a few years for me of really kind of moving away from that. And yeah, you do notice, I think, a lot of different things, different shifts happening, feeling
You do. You do. And I also struggle with anxiety, and alcohol is just really bad for anxiety. It just, you can have a drink and then feel anxiety up to like 5 days after, just from that evening of drinking, not even drinking, just having, a couple of glasses of wine. The anxiety is just much more prevalent. So I don't need that added to my life. So I just choose not to have it.
Yeah. So I noticed certainly, and I wasn't going through a divorce and becoming a single parent and all of that during the pandemic. But of course, you're now navigating all of those things. And I
Mhm.
noticed that over the pandemic, I was drinking more.
Mhm.
And I feel like it started to punctuate our time where we were, because everything was now happening in your home. That's another place where drinking, all of a sudden it's okay, I'm going to hang up the Zoom call, have a drink. Now I'm in my personal time. And then even for me, I noticed that was ramping up. But can you talk a little bit more about that, how that kind of arc was happening for you and how you were navigating that role as a parent during that time?
So I became a full-time single mom just at the end of March. So 2 weeks into the lockdown, the first lockdown here, where I'm located, and I actually look back on it and actually was able to, even at the time, see it as a blessing, because my ex-husband is no longer in my daughter's life, and very much his choice on that. But the last time she saw him was that March. And so she was in deep grief around knowing that her father was not really going to be present in her life anymore. And so the pandemic for us created a cocoon, to be honest, of healing for her. If she had, I can't even imagine if she had to go to school. I can't imagine if she would have to put a happy face on and go to school when she was really in deep grief. And so for us, the pandemic at that time, while very difficult, was a blessing, because she could just stay at home with me. She could just feel what she needed to feel. And by the time the world opened up again, she was feeling a lot better. And so for us, it was a blessing. She said to me the other day, which was so interesting, she said, "I didn't find it that hard, Mom. Like, I didn't find the pandemic that hard." And I said, then that means I was doing my job, because I really wanted to protect her mental health also and protect mine. And we had like a routine. We would go for walks at a certain time every day. We had like little schedules, and it was hard for me. It was a really hard time for me, for sure, as it was for millions and millions of people. But when she told me that she didn't feel like it was that bad, I was like, I did my job.
Yeah, you did. I'm the child of divorced parents. My parents divorced, I think around the time I was 7.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't a lot of communication. In fact, I didn't know my parents were separating until my mom and I were in the elevator to our new home, our new apartment. And I was like, "Where's Dad?" And she's like, "Oh, he's not coming with us." And
Oh,
really the extent of the conversation. And I just remember being in grade 3 and having a teacher who would make all this effort to get me to smile. And
mm-hmm.
I just didn't smile for I think like a year. It
Mm-hmm.
just so heavy. And so I say kudos to you, because that's a wonderful, wonderful thing to give your child, that feeling of that they have someone to talk to and communicate with, and
Mm-hmm.
that it isn't such a traumatic, like I'm sure it was a difficult experience, but it's experience that you help them get through with
Mm-hmm.
the skills that you were giving them. So
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that, Amy. And gosh, that is tough for you, like for sharing that too. That's tough. And I see, I see clients, a lot of clients, who whose marriages are failing and they're getting divorced. And one of the things I am always so focused on is like, how are you telling the children this news? How are you including them in the process so they don't think it's their fault? And how are you helping them navigate through their emotions? Because it's so important.
So if you, and I'm sure you are counseling people all the time who are going through divorce,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to, I mean, if we were to kind of separate out the kinds of advice and the pillars of divorcing
Mm.
best way possible, the conscious uncoupling, I guess, terminology we use these days. But
Yes.
when it comes to the kids, what are some of the things that you think, you've talked about them, that routine and that sense of safety? What are the best practices that you kind of talk to your clients about?
Well, first and foremost, I say conflict is what hurts kids, not divorce.
Mm.
So it's really conflict between parents. Actually, even when parents are married, conflict in the house really hurts children. And then, you can have two loving households and parents have, even though they're not married, they can have mutual respect for each other. They can have respectful communications. They can, again, we come back to emotional regulation, manage their own emotions, be a model for their children on how it is to manage their own emotions. On the flip side, you can have parents who hate each other, want to retaliate against each other, have conflict all the time, use the children in the middle, and obviously it really hurts the kids. It's a hugely traumatic experience. So it's really beyond just a marriage breaking up. It's like, okay, if you have children, you do have this extra responsibility to manage your own shit, to be honest. You do.
Mm-hmm. Which can be so hard. I know people who have ended up in these high conflict divorces
Mm-hmm.
where an individual is doing their best to navigate that with some integrity, and it just doesn't seem to be working out for them. I don't know what do you do in a situation like that when you I guess it's you can only control the controllables.
Yeah. You can only control yourself.
Mhm.
And you can only control the controllables. Yeah, for sure. I think often people think they have more control over things that they don't actually.
Yeah.
And so it's really creating that stable home. If you can't for the other parent, that's, and you can't because you don't have control over the other parent, how do you create that stable environment for yourself, for your child at your home? How do you manage your own emotions? How do you have practices in your life that help you stay regulated and grounded through this difficult time? And yeah, it is difficult. And there are high conflict divorces where there is one side that is especially high conflict, and then one side that's not. But it's like even knowing, okay, where are you feeding into this? Like, what is your personal responsibility? Are you feeding into their conflict in any way? Are you retaliating in any way? Like, just looking at what you are bringing to the table.
And I think kids get so much out of just how they see you respond in those situations, right? I think it's just being able to see that healthy response helps them then in how they're dealing with conflict or with their emotions as well. You feed off of that energy, whatever it is. And if it's a calming energy, you get so much more from that, obviously, than if it's very reactive and in high stress.
Well, we co-regulate, right? So our nervous systems co-regulate. So if you're all wired and anxious and angry, then your child is, and even animals, actually your pets in the house too, but you'll all feel that. Your nervous systems will start activating. And so, but if you can regulate yourself, then your child will also regulate too. So it is really, like, I wasn't kidding when you asked that question, like what's the key to successful relationships? Or, a big part of it is really emotional regulation.
I think co-regulation is so cool.
Mhm.
I love experiencing that in my own household when I can see my partner or one of my children having a hard time managing their emotions. And if I can be that, I guess, source of calm, it makes such a difference, or to de-escalate those emotions in the household. And I mean, I love that. Like, that's not something I think I was conscious of until I became a parent, that, oh, like this is how we feed off of each other, and this is how we can help each other manage our feelings.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was totally ill-equipped. I mean, you know me, I had a baby when I was 23 years old, and I was not, I didn't even know the term co-regulation. I probably hadn't even heard of that term until 5 years ago, if I'm honest. And I certainly hadn't thought about that. I mean, and I think a lot of people are like this. I was just, how am I going to get through this day with this baby and this life that we're leading? And then my older daughter is autistic as well. And so and I think for parents of kids who are neurodivergent, that co-regulation is even more important.
Right.
You know, not to create a hierarchy of importance, but yeah, I think it's even more important and critical. But I have found that very difficult, because co-regulation, I think, often with kids like my oldest, was very difficult and didn't always work either. So it's
Or a teenager.
Yeah. Yeah. Or a teenager. Exactly. Or yeah, exactly. But it's knowing, like, yeah, is it always going to work? No, it's not. But it's definitely a better environment. And they can also learn, like, if you model those skills, like, the other day I was stressed about something, and my daughter came downstairs and was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm just grounding myself. I'm just grounding come do it with me." And she was like, she hates when I use meditation voice. She calls it meditation voice. She's like, "No, you use your meditation voice." And I was like, "Okay, fine. Just come sit with me." Because I knew that I didn't have to do the meditation voice for her to get the benefits of it. But yeah, it works some of the time. But at the other times it doesn't. At least you're modeling something.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly a better way to live. Yeah, it's so interesting to hear even your kid, who is experiencing this all the time, is triggered by their moms.
Oh, I can't. She does not take any sort of tips from me on co-regulation. Let's just put it that way. I'm like, okay, she sees a mental health professional because obviously I walk the talk, but I'll say to her, I know you can use this tool. And she'll be like, no. And I'll say, well, your therapist would tell you, and be like, this is the best idea ever. But if it's coming from me, no way. So I get that. I'm still her mom.
Right.
But she does see me model these things all the time. So that alone is enough. And then it'll come around. It's in there. It's in her brain.
Yeah, you've planted the seeds.
I have planted the seeds.
They'll come to fruition. I mean, my oldest is now 22. And
oh my gosh, I can't even believe that, because I met her as a baby. That's crazy.
And it's only now that things are coming out where you can see, some of the things that you planted, it is nice.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk about your role as a therapist? We've been touching on that, but you started divorce coaching, and then it kind of blossomed. I know that I've heard you talk on your podcast about how there was this point at which you felt it was more ethical if you were to get more training in order to be able to do the work that you wanted to do.
Yeah. So I after that first coaching training, I ended up doing 4 more, and working towards becoming a coach with the International Coaching Federation. So I have that designation, but I felt like I was very ethical in this is what coaching can do, and I'm not going in the lane of therapy. And not all coaches do that, even though they should. But I was like, no, I don't have the training or the skills yet to go that deeply with clients. And I was helping successfully clients navigate through their divorce and separation, but there was all this other stuff that was coming up, and that was, from past relationships or that relationship, or things that were impacting them in the future. And I just knew that, okay, if I want to go deeper in this, then I need to get some more training. And I had this seed of a thought that maybe I should become a therapist. And it was like so crazy to me, because I was, in my, I think I was like 42 when I started the process. But I thought there's no way. My first thought was like, there's no way I can do this. Like, it's very expensive. I'm a full-time single mom. I have a full-time job. How am I going to do this? So I sort of put it out of my mind, or tried to. And then it kept coming back. That little seed, something had happened. It started to grow. And I thought, okay, instead of saying I can't do this, why don't I say, how could I do this? Like, how might I do this? And I figured it out, which I can't believe I did, but I did. And so yeah, I quit my job, my full-time job, and I went back to school and got my master's degree, which was insane and very hard. And then I, little by little, started building my practice, and here we are now. So I'm a therapist. I'm a psychotherapist. I love, love, love the work I do. And I decided when I was almost like a couple of weeks into school that I really wanted to work with couples. And so I also concurrently, as well as doing my master's, did a bunch of other training in order to work with couples, because it is quite specialized. So that's how I got to where I am.
Wow. And we've had a lot of these conversations. Amy and I, over the years, we were colleagues for many years and friends. And I feel like it is a common conversation. We get to this kind of middle-age point where you think, okay, either I've come to the end of the road in the career that I started with, and now it's time for something new, or like genuine unhappiness with kind of where I'm at and wanting to do something different. But there is this, how am I going to do this? The time and the money and all of the things you described there. And I love what you said about reframing that, asking the question, how might I do this? How long did it take you to do the program?
It took me a little over 2.5 years. And so I didn't dally. Let's put it that way. I just did it. I didn't take any breaks. I am not recommending that everyone does that. It was very, very intense. And I didn't really realize how intense it was going to be. I'm really glad I did it. But once I was doing it, I was like, oh my gosh, is this the right decision? But it was just very hard. So 2.5 years to do my master's. And then there's a bunch of other hoops to jump through. And I've almost jumped through all of them except for one. So that's where we're at.
This is the question that I find we're asking everybody we're talking to, and it's, how did you get the confidence? Like, that, was it an internal knowing that you had given that journey that you'd been through, that very painful experience? What was it in you that said, like, I can do this, I'm going to do this?
So it wasn't confidence, it was courage.
Mm.
Yeah. And courage is moving forward in the face of fear. It is one of my key values that I live by. And my first step was knowing what my values actually were in life and then living by them. So I did some work on my own. It's funny because I do this work a lot with clients, but I did some work on my own and really drilling down on, what are my values in life now? How do I want to live my life? And courage is my number one value. And so when fear comes up, I don't just jump without doing needed research. So I did the research I needed to do. I had the data available. I had it all in front of me. I saw the risks, and I was still scared. And then I just was like, well, if my key value in life is courage, then how would I move forward in the face of fear? And that meant doing it. And so I did.
I really like that. I think we've talked to a few women now who have said in their 40s, they're assessing their values. It feels like sort of like a new midlife crisis, but the best kind, where you're really considering what's important to me, and you're moving away maybe from that checklist that you grew up, that you felt bound to, and being able to really think about, what do I want? I want to be. And I just think it's so interesting that it seems to happen for particularly the women I talk to, in their 40s at that point in life where they're like, wait a second, is this the direction that I want to be going in? And then developing that courage, because
Mm-hmm.
it's so important.
Yeah. And I think, we live maybe in our 20s and 30s living the values of someone else.
Mm.
And either our partners or what society tells us we should value, or our parents. And it's quite an exercise to really dig down and say, okay, well, what are my actual values? It doesn't mean that they're wrong or right or better or worse than someone else's. It's just like, what are mine? And so that work was really important, and it still guides me. It still guides me in the decisions I make and the choices I make pretty much on a daily basis.
I think we tend to think we know our values, but I think what you're describing, which feels like a very practical, really knowing of what your values are, giving you that, that language to go back to feels important.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all have this internal sense of what feels right for us, but it sounds like you do something very concrete.
I do. When I work with clients on this, I guide them through a couple of visualizations. We mine their values that way. I also have lists of different values, and then we really dig into, what does this value mean for you? What are ways in your life that you are living this value? What are ways that you're not living this value? And my clients hate me for this. I generally ask them to pare them down to 6, and then after that, 2. And it doesn't mean that we can't have different values at different stages of our life, but I feel like if you're going through a certain stage of life right now, what are those 2 values that are really important for you right now that can help guide your decisions and really just be a North Star in how you're living your life?
So if courage is one, what is your other? Can I ask that?
Yeah, you can. It's personal development.
Okay.
Yeah.
These values can kind of change over time. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. Like I have, number of other values, like my family is up there. It's not that they're disregarded, and it's not that there's not other important values, but the two, and I reevaluated them about a year and a half ago, and it's probably going to be time to reevaluate them again. But just those are the 2 that I wanted to be front and center in my life in the last little while, and they have been.
I'm going to have to think about
Yeah, I like the intention with that. I think when I did therapy, it helped me realize that one of my core values is security.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big one for me. And I've struggled with it a little bit because sometimes I wonder if it holds me back, but at the same time, I get why that's a core
Mm-hmm.
for me. And it allows me maybe to be more compassionate with myself around making certain decisions, because that is one of my core values. And so but yeah, I like the intention with doing that work. And maybe I would identify 2 different values as being the ones that I really want to focus on and center around.
Yeah, I think that's important, Amy, is like you can have these, a bunch of values, but what are the ones right now in your life that you want to keep front and center? And like I said, I will be reevaluating mine. I think it's a good time for me to reevaluate mine. So I think I will soon. I'm pretty sure courage is still going to be there, but we'll
We
see
need
what
it.
else.
Yeah. We need
Yeah.
it. Well, as we kind of get to the end of our time, I want to ask one last question, which is, if you could go back to that difficult fork in the road and
Mm.
think about who you were in that moment, and also think about others who are facing that kind of scenario as well, what advice would you give yourself, or what would you say to that person?
I think that in terms of advice, I think I almost already gave it, is that knowing that no one else is coming to save you, and that it's you. And and I often say this to people, that you are the one that you have always been looking for. We search for things outside of ourselves all the time. We search for happiness outside of ourselves. We search for things in our partners outside of ourselves, but actually it's all within us. And so to know that, oh my gosh, that is such a game changer.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you again. And I find so much wisdom. I mean, how rare is it that we find so much wisdom on social media? But even just following you and your early bedtimes and you're just being outside. Sometimes I'll see, and I hope I want you to know this. Sometimes I'll see your practice of posting how you're going for your walk every day and getting out in nature. And I think, okay, that's my reminder. So you're putting that out every day and someone is receiving it. So I thank you.
Yeah. And thank you for your podcast, Sisters in Sobriety. I loved listening to it, and I'm going to continue to listen to it because I think there's so much wonderful life advice that I want to apply in my own life. So yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for having me on. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you found inspiration here, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts and leaving us a 5-star review. It really helps us. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn.